When people think of the Cold War, they often picture concrete bunkers. These structures were built deep underground. They were meant to protect people from nuclear blasts. Many governments spent vast sums of money on these projects. The common belief was that thick concrete and steel were the only things that could withstand such powerful forces. However, this idea had many problems. These large, centralized bunkers were expensive targets. They required complex ventilation systems, power generators, and long-term storage solutions. A direct hit would turn even the strongest bunker into a tomb. This made them less practical for the average family, who could not afford such a complex and costly hideaway. These official shelters were also very limited in number. They were mostly reserved for government officials and military leaders. The general public was often left with instructions to duck and cover. This advice was not very helpful against the real threat of radioactive fallout. The fallout could travel for hundreds of miles on the wind. It could contaminate land, water, and air for weeks or even months. A simple concrete room in a basement might offer some protection from the initial blast if you were far enough away, but it would do little to shield you from the persistent, invisible danger of radiation. The focus on blast resistance alone was a critical flaw in Cold War survival planning. The psychological impact of these bunkers was also significant. They created a sense of separation from the outside world. Being trapped in a small, windowless concrete box for an extended period would be mentally taxing. People would face issues like claustrophobia, lack of fresh air, and the constant fear of what waited outside. These shelters were designed as waiting rooms for the end of the world. They were not designed for long-term living or for rebuilding society afterward. The resources needed to maintain them were immense. If the power failed or the air filters clogged, the shelter would quickly become uninhabitable. It was a high-tech solution with many points of failure. This reliance on complex, expensive structures created a false sense of security for a select few. It left the vast majority of the population vulnerable and unprepared. The strategy was flawed because it ignored simpler, more accessible solutions. It focused on withstanding the initial cataclysmic event, but it overlooked the more practical challenges of long-term survival in a post-nuclear world. True preparedness needed to be decentralized. It needed to be affordable and accessible to everyone. The common person needed a method that did not require a government contract or a team of engineers to build. This need for a better way led to the quiet development of a much more practical alternative. The Earth Cradle Shelter was a direct answer to the failings of traditional bunkers. It was not a high-tech fortress. It was a practical, low-cost shelter that anyone could build. The design was based on simple, time-tested principles. It used materials that were readily available to the average person. Instead of tons of concrete and steel, it used the earth itself as the primary shield. People could build these shelters in their own backyards. They used basic tools like shovels, saws, and hammers. The core materials were things like wooden beams, logs, plastic sheeting, and sandbags. This accessibility was the key to its genius. It put the power of survival back into the hands of ordinary families. The construction process was straightforward. A person would start by digging a trench. The trench was typically long and narrow, like a large grave. The depth was usually around 6 to 8 feet. This depth was crucial for providing mass for radiation shielding. Once the trench was dug, a wooden frame was built inside. This frame formed the roof and walls of the living space. It was often made from salvaged lumber or logs from nearby trees. The goal was not to create a blast-proof structure. The goal was to create a sturdy frame that could support the weight of the earth that would be piled on top. This made it a project that a family could complete over a few weekends. After the frame was in place, it was covered with a waterproof barrier. Heavy-duty plastic sheeting was the most common material used for this purpose. This layer was essential to keep the interior dry. Moisture is the enemy of any underground structure. Once the waterproof layer was secure, the excavated dirt was piled back on top of the shelter. The earth was mounded high over the roof, creating a thick, protective layer. This earthen cover, often several feet thick, was the shelter's primary defense. It used the immense density of the soil to block gamma radiation. The final structure looked like a simple grass-covered mound in a backyard, making it discreet and unobtrusive. The benefits of this design were numerous. First, it was incredibly cost-effective. The main cost was labor, not expensive materials. Second, it was discreet. Unlike a concrete bunker with a visible entrance, an Earth Cradle Shelter blended into the landscape. This made it less of a target. Third, it was effective. The thick layer of earth provided excellent protection against radioactive fallout, which was the most widespread and long-lasting threat after a nuclear detonation. It was a people's solution, born out of necessity and common sense. It empowered individuals to take responsibility for their own safety using resources they already had. The effectiveness of the Earth Cradle Shelter was not based on modern technology. It was based on fundamental principles of natural engineering. The primary principle was the use of mass for radiation shielding. Radioactive particles, like gamma rays, lose energy as they pass through dense material. Earth is very dense. Every foot of packed soil provides a significant barrier. A shelter buried under 3 to 4 feet of earth could reduce radiation exposure to survivable levels. This is the same principle that makes caves and deep mines naturally safe from surface radiation. The Earth Cradle simply created an artificial cave that was accessible and purpose-built for human survival. Another key principle was thermal regulation. The Earth has a massive thermal capacity. This means it heats up and cools down very slowly. An underground shelter maintains a relatively stable temperature year-round. In the winter, the surrounding Earth insulates the shelter from the cold air above. In the summer, it keeps the interior cool. This natural climate control reduced the need for complex heating and cooling systems. This was a critical advantage for long-term occupation. It conserved precious fuel and energy resources. A simple ventilation system, often consisting of 2 pipes at opposite ends of the shelter, was usually enough to provide fresh air without compromising the shelter's integrity. The arched or peaked roof design of the wooden frame was also an important engineering feature. This shape is naturally strong. It distributed the immense weight of the overlying earth down into the ground. This prevented the roof from collapsing. This is a principle seen in ancient structures like Roman aqueducts and cathedrals. It is a simple but highly effective way to manage heavy loads. By using a triangular or curved shape for the roof beams, builders could create a strong structure without needing thick, heavy materials. The earth itself became part of the structural system, pressing down and holding the frame together. Finally, the shelter worked in harmony with the natural environment. Over time, grass and other plants would grow on the earthen mound. Their roots would help to stabilize the soil and prevent erosion. The shelter literally became a living part of the landscape. This integration with nature was a stark contrast to the sterile, artificial environment of a concrete bunker. The Earth Cradle was not about defeating nature. It was about using nature's own protective qualities to ensure safety. This philosophy recognized that the most reliable and resilient systems are often the simplest ones, which have been tested over millions of years of natural history. The principles behind the Earth Cradle Shelter are just as relevant today as they were during the Cold War. While the threat of a global nuclear exchange may have receded, other dangers have emerged. Extreme weather events such as powerful tornadoes and hurricanes are becoming more common. An earth-sheltered structure provides outstanding protection against high winds and flying debris. Its low profile and strong earth-backed walls make it far safer than a conventional above-ground home. Homeowners in tornado-prone regions can apply these ideas by building underground storm cellars or reinforcing basements with additional earth berming. These natural engineering concepts can also be applied to modern green building. Earth-sheltered homes are incredibly energy efficient. The natural insulation provided by the surrounding soil dramatically reduces heating and cooling costs. This lowers a home's carbon footprint and saves the owner money on utility bills. Architects are increasingly incorporating elements like green roofs and earth berms into their designs. A green roof, which is a layer of soil and vegetation on top of a building, provides insulation, manages stormwater runoff, and creates a habitat for wildlife. This is a direct application of the Earth Cradle's core idea: use the earth as a protective and functional layer. For those interested in personal preparedness, the lessons are clear. Do not depend solely on complex high-tech solutions that can fail. Instead, focus on simple, robust systems that use readily available resources. A well-stocked pantry is more reliable than a complex supply chain. A hand-pumped well is more resilient than a municipal water system that depends on electricity. The Earth Cradle teaches us to look for low-tech, high-impact solutions. Building a small root cellar to store food, for example, uses the same principles of thermal mass and insulation to preserve food without refrigeration. It is a small-scale application of a powerful survival concept. The legacy of the Earth Cradle Shelter is its emphasis on empowerment and self-reliance. It serves as a historical reminder that ordinary people can take meaningful steps to protect themselves and their families. It shows that the most effective solutions are often the simplest ones, derived from a deep understanding of the natural world. In an age of increasing complexity and uncertainty, the wisdom of the Earth Cradle is more important than ever. We must learn to work with nature, not against it. By embracing these timeless principles, we can build safer homes, more resilient communities, and a more secure future for generations to come.